Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today I want to talk about why the Enfield No. 2 revolver lost its hammer spur. Now, I did a video about this, about the Albion, the Scottish production No. 2s a little while ago, in which I said the exact wrong thing. I explained this as being a change to accommodate the British Tank Corps. That's not correct. So first off, thanks to viewer Thomas for pointing out to me that that was in fact not correct and sending me the resources that he had come across to prove it. And that, I think, is the interesting second half of today's video. I want to talk about how this sort of mistake happens, how this sort of information becomes entrenched, mistaken information becomes entrenched in the historical community, and what can be done to fix it. So let's start off with the facts of the matter, and that would be the No. 2 revolver. When it starts off, it is a single action / double action revolver with a nice big hammer spur here so that you can cock the thing and fire it with a nice light single action trigger press. However, in 1938, that design is replaced with a double action only version that has no hammer spur any longer. Now, what I told you in my Albion No. 2 video was that this was done to accommodate the British Tank Corps, that they had problems with the hammer spur catching on the hatches of vehicles when they were trying to get out. There are a couple things that I could have done to recognize that this was not true, and I didn't. We'll get to those in a moment. The reality of the matter is the change to a hammerless double action only, essentially hammerless, double action only gun was made to simplify training and, well, basically to simplify training. So I have here the 1938, this is from June 22nd, 1938. It is a report on the testing of the hammerless double action only model. And it specifically includes 4 reasons why these changes were felt to be an improvement on the gun. So I'm going to paraphrase here. Number 1, it is easy to fire, and with every shot, whether the first or subsequent shot, requires the same manipulation to fire it. So on a double action, single action version, you may cock the hammer for the first shot. That gives you a very nice, light, crisp first shot, and then a very heavy double action second shot. This is very similar to a training conundrum we see in modern semi-automatic pistols, although reversed. In a modern semi-auto, the idea is you would carry a DASA gun with the hammer down. Your first shot has a very long, heavy trigger pull that is more difficult to shoot accurately than the action cycles itself as soon as it fires, and all the subsequent shots have nice, light, crisp semi-auto or single action trigger pulls. The question is it worth trying to train around that extra heavy first shot? Well, the British had the opposite issue. Their question was, is it worth trying to train around an extra light first shot and heavy subsequent shots? And taking the hammer and the double action out, the hammer spur and the double action out, eliminate those problems. Number 2, the pistol gives the firer greater confidence in handling. It is less likely to go off and is particularly preferred when firing from a vehicle through a loophole, horse, or possibly a motor bicycle. We don't really have motor bicycles anymore, but the idea is there's just less to mess with, and you don't have the hammer potentially catching on, well, vehicle loopholes, the pistol firing ports that you would find in some vehicles. So here we see the beginnings of one of the kernels of truth behind the idea that this conversion was done specifically for the Armored Corps. And again, we'll get to the other kernels of truth in a moment. Number 3, only in the case of the first shot is it slightly less accurate in the hands of a trained man. For subsequent shots, it is more accurate, particularly if fired at a high rate. So being able to cock the revolver gives you a better first shot if you're decently trained, but after that, it all kind of comes out a wash. And they weren't like, the utilization of the pistol wasn't such that they were really concerned about giving the best trained guys a little bit more accuracy with only their first shot. And number 4, training would be simplified. If you don't have to go through half the steps of shooting the gun, if there is no issue of what if you cock the thing manually, if it's just is revolver, pull trigger, revolver, fire, that makes things a lot simpler. And again, we're not trying to train a marksmanship team here. This is the backup defensive weapon for a bunch of guys who are never supposed to have to use the thing in the first place. So if you can simplify the training on this, and thus have more time available to train them on their real jobs, be they artillery or engineering or the vehicle that they're supposed to be driving and fighting with, so much the better. So that's the reality. This is, by the way, from the British List of Changes, this document. It is numbered B2289, dated June 22nd, 1938. And I'll have pictures of a couple. I have 3 separate pages from this overall report. I don't have the whole thing, and that's part of the problem. Now, when I went to do my video, I'll be honest, I did find this explanation a little bit dubious. I am not a huge subject matter expert in the number 2. I was relying on other resources, primarily the one published book on the subject, which is 380 Enfield number 2 Revolver by Ian Skennerton and Mark Stamps. This is considered an authoritative book. It's really the only book on the subject, and it really is a very good book. However, like many books, it is both a period of its time and it is susceptible to mistakes. So this particular book was written in 1993. Sorry, this book was written in 1989, published in 1983. And while I have reached out to Mark Stamps, I haven't been able to hear back from him, but he did make a comment that I found online that was revealing, and that was when he was writing the book, or co-writing the book, he actually reached out to Herb Woodend, who was at the time the curator of the Pattern Room. This is the British Royal Armoury's collection today, and it is the definitive collection of British military small arms. And Woodend actually confirmed to him that yes, this conversion from hammer to no hammer was done for the Armor Corps. Now, this brings up some relevant issues. First off, curators can be extremely knowledgeable people, but it is basically impossible for them to be experts on every item under their care, especially in a collection as absolutely massive as the Pattern Room was, as the Royal Armouries now is. And so it is understandable that an author would take a curator's word for a fact like this, but it's also something you still have to kind of take with a grain of salt. No offense to curators out there, but they don't always know all the details. And here's where the problem came from. In, I believe, 1936, although I don't have that document to specifically reference from, the Armored Corps actually made the complaint that the hammers on the pistols were an issue. I can't tell you with 100% certainty exactly why they thought they were an issue, but they thought they were, and they requested a hammerless version of the pistol. That is almost certainly the document that Woodend was thinking of and was referencing when he told Stamps about the reason for this change. In reality, that conversion, that request from the Armor Corps was not what led to the actual adoption of the hammerless version of the gun. It would be a couple years later, trials would be done, and ultimately it would be a training issue primarily that did also see some benefit to the gun in using through shooting ports in vehicles. Now, why did this information become fixed? Well, part of it is the fact that it was printed in a book. One of the problems with books is once it's printed, it's hard, you can't change it unless you actually do a reprinting. And I know this firsthand. There are a number of small mistakes in my book, Chassepot de FAMAS, up there. We printed an errata sheet on our website, and subsequent reprints, we fixed those things. But if there's only one printing of a book, sometimes those issues, well, there is no way to fix those issues. Often the printing of a book will lead to more interest in a subject, which will lead to more research, and will lead to improved information, which then the book doesn't have in it. This is also very much a pre-internet book. So research was more difficult. Communication, especially with collectors and museum curators around the world, was more difficult. And it's very, like a lot of pre-internet books have problems like this, which should not be taken as a mark against the books in general. Authors do absolutely the best they can, but it's hard to expect absolute perfection. So first off, Woodend probably should have known better. For my part, one of the things that I used, because I did find this a little questionable, but then I took a look at the tanker's holsters. So, and I mentioned this in my video, the standard holster for the number 2 revolver was a full flap holster, covers over the hammer, and that would prevent any problems with the hammer catching on anything. But this is one of the tanker holsters, and it's open at the top. And I looked at this and I went, oh, well, okay. It becomes plausible that the hammer's sticking out and it's going to catch on things. Between that and the fact that we have a good reference book that says this, I'll go with it. What could have fixed this problem for me would be if I had actually put the gun in the holster and recognized that, in fact, it's an open-topped holster, but it's deep enough that it fully covers the hammer. And so that problem is no longer a plausible one. Like, if you're a tanker, there's no way that this is going to be any different for you in getting out of the tank than this thing. One of the other things that is kind of specific to British firearms in a case like this is that this document is actually a little bit hard to get. This is from the British List of Changes, which is their formal documentation of basically all the changes that are made to small arms, from the absolute little tiniest change in designation of part marks, the difference in Enfield rifle rear sights from, through 3 or 4 or 5 different marks and variations. All of that stuff up through the really big stuff, like when they actually adopted guns, the trials reports for guns. That stuff is published in the List of Changes. However, the List of Changes is copyrighted. This is subject to Crown copyright, and thus it is not something that you can legally republish. Now, that hasn't stopped a lot of people from taking little snippets like this and putting them out there, but it does make it substantially more difficult for researchers to get widespread, easy access to the information. In a lot of other places, this sort of information is, while it may at one point be classified, it's not copyrighted, and so it can be published, and it tends to be much more easily accessible. With these things, like, you really pretty much have to go to the British archives and dig this stuff out of the physical archives, because until they get around to digitizing all of it, it's just not available. And I'm not using that as an excuse, but it makes, in particular, British subject matter a little bit more difficult for people to readily access. So that's the story of why this thing was actually developed. It's because it wasn't, revolver use wasn't that important, and anything that saves training time and simplifies the handling of the gun is seen as more important than something that may increase the tactical utility of the gun by just a little bit, by just a small number of the people who are using them. And then also where these stories tend to come from. This is in fact a case of a nugget of truth, that being that the Tank Corps did request a hammerless version of the gun, being expanded into a wider explanation than it really is. Namely, this wasn't done because the Tank Corps asked for it. So hopefully you guys found this a bit enlightening and a bit interesting. Thanks for watching.